So I'm David Shearer, Executive Director of Claremont Heritage, and we're here with special guest Sustainable Claremont, joining you and your monthly dialogue. Tonight we're going to be talking about the upcoming cultural resources preservation ordinance that's going through the city committees right now. And to see if anybody has questions or needs clarification. But this ordinance is something that we're hoping to kind of codify some things that we've already had in place at the city, and Chris Spears will talk more about that. But this just kind of makes things more formal in terms of an ordinance that addresses things, so that every time a project comes before the AC or the planning commission, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So we have some things in place that will also give us a little bit of a pushback to some of the state guidelines that have been coming down. But I'm going to have Chris share the bulk of that, and you all know Chris Williams. I'm going to share his screen and get started. All right, turn over to Chris.
Good evening, everyone. Can everybody see the screen presentation?
Yes.
All right, how about me? Can you see me?
Yes.
All right, so
Yes.
I'll have to keep smiling. All right, thank you. Yes, I'm here tonight to talk about an effort that the city has been involved with now for several years. It's a new historic preservation ordinance that we're seeking to get passed. Just a quick summary of the ordinance. It's a new ordinance regarding preservation of cultural resources citywide, so throughout the city. There's no one specific district or anything like that. It's based on the work of an ad hoc committee that was appointed by the city council. Changes the name of the Architectural Commission to the Architectural and Preservation Commission, and improves their duties and composition to so the focus of the commission will add preservation. And then it deletes existing demolition ordinance and replaces it with the new process for assessing demolitions of properties constructed over 45 years prior to the request for demolition. It also revises the design review criteria that are contained in our current code to add a consideration for preservation. So with that, just a quick summary of the history. So the original draft of the ordinance was created by an ad hoc committee. The title of the committee was Ad hoc Committee for Citywide Design Guidelines and Historic Preservation. They originally appointed by the City Council in 2017. The committee met 20 times from January 2018 through December 2021. The committee's draft ordinance incorporates model language from the California Office of Historic Preservation. So what happened was this committee met and developed a draft ordinance, and the bulk of that ordinance is what the city is adopting now. As the ad hoc committee was meeting, they developed a number of drafts. 2 drafts were reviewed by Lucinda Woodward, the Office of Historic Preservation, who made some suggested revisions, and those revisions have been made in the current city draft. In addition, the ad hoc committees developed draft citywide design guidelines for buildings and neighborhoods, which will be reviewed by the Architectural Commission at the city over the next few months. So I know that a big part of our crowd tonight is from Sustainable Claremont, and I just wanted to make some connection between a preservation ordinance and sustainability. So let me go ahead and make a a few points, hopefully that'll keep you interested to listen to the rest of, a lot of words on my presentation. Sorry that I don't have a lot of great photos for you. So in terms of sustainability, in most cases, the greenest structure is the one that already exists. So tearing down and rebuilding a new building, despite the number of green features that the new building has, it still is going to have a hard time being greener than the existing building. Preservation represents a high-profile level of leadership regarding retaining and reusing resources, as opposed to the sort of use and discard philosophy that has become prevalent in American consumers' culture. By focusing on retention of existing windows, myths about efficiency and new windows can be dispelled and building envelope can be emphasized. I bring this up because it seems like staff level and our architectural commission spend a lot of time focusing on windows for new structures. Next is older buildings are often quite energy efficient due to their design and materials. Most of them were built before we had energy codes, and they used long-term accepted construction methods to heat and cool or minimize the need for any sort of mechanical heating and cooling. So these include things like the material mass, so stone bases, heavy stucco, black and plaster walls, clay tile roofs, and heavier timber. Deeply set windows, so the windows don't catch as much solar heat gain during the day because they get a little bit of shade from the depth at which they're located. Deeper eaves, providing more shade for the building, and because they're older and often the way that they were built included landscaping of mature deciduous trees around the perimeter of the building, which provide shade during the summer and drop their leaves and allow the sun in during the colder winter months. So with that, I'll go ahead and get into the boring stuff for you. I want to make a quick summary of what the changes are that we're making here. So first is amending chapter 2.42 to rename the Architectural Commission and modify its duties. The new name is Architectural and Preservation Commission. Next is to delete an existing section of the code that talks about a 90-day demolition delay. That was the extent of our preservation, codified preservation code that we had before. The new code deals with that in a much more sophisticated way. Next is to amend chapter 16.300, which is our design review section of the municipal code. And then now we would modify the name of the Architectural Commission, the makeup of the commission, the duties of the commission, and we do modify the design review criteria and procedures slightly to include an emphasis on historic preservation. Next, we amend chapter 16.301 regarding building conservation and demolition. Just some modified language. Next, add a new chapter titled 16.302. So this is the heart of the ordinance. This is the bulk of the changes that we're making, an entirely new chapter in our code. And finally, amend chapter 16.321 regarding appeals to include the new procedures for staff and the Architectural and Preservation Commission for decisions related to cultural resources. So I'll get that boring here as quickly as I can. This is a quick outline of the new chapter. So this is the actual cultural resource preservation chapter. It's 16.302 in the municipal code. And I'll try to summarize the major sections. First, it's just quickly intent, definition, purpose, and goals. So it lays out what the intent are and creates, there's something like 4 pages of new defined terms that we need in order to establish the framework necessary for the new ordinance. Next is this staff and architectural review, sorry, that should be APC, Architectural and Preservation Commission and council review responsibilities. So it lays out what gets reviewed at the staff level, by the commission as well as city council. Next are criteria and procedures for designating resources. So this is for creating and identifying and labeling any historic resource in town as a cultural resource. So there's a very long section in there about this process. And review demolition of structures over 45 years. That's the new section. If you remember, I just said that we deleted a connection. We deleted a section in our code that exists that included a sort of a categorical 90-day demolition hold that we had for any buildings that were over 50 years. So next is a new certificate that the staff would be able to take applications in. Minor projects are reviewed at staff level, and major projects are reviewed at the commission level. All those decisions are appealable to either the commission if it's a staff level decision, or the city council if it's a commission decision. So, and then there's a section that deals with the criteria, as well as a list of standard conditions of approval that would be associated with the certificate of appropriateness. So the certificate of appropriateness is really the piece of paper that you need in order to modify a resource. Next is a section that allows for some waivers, so an economic hardship waiver or a waiver for imminent threat. So this is a building that's in danger of falling over or some other danger that would allow us to act more quickly than going through the regular commission process. Next is the section that requires that cultural resources be maintained. And so it lays out what that looks like. There's specific things that need to be done in order to continue and maintain a resource and not just allow it to we call it demolition by neglect, but basically to allow it to degrade to a point where it can be saved. 240 includes some economic incentives. I'll talk about incentives of preservation in just a moment. And then 260, the enforcement and penalties section, which is fairly detailed regarding what happens when you don't follow this ordinance. All right, so let's touch on just a few simple terms that I think we all will need to become more comfortable with. The first is cultural resource. We're not talking about historic preservation, it's cultural resource preservation. So cultural resource is historic, is any historic, prehistoric, built, or natural resources that are significant in the history of the city, region, state, or nation. Next is the register of structures of historic and architectural merit in Claremont. That's the Claremont Register, or more generally referred to by state and federal folks as the local register. This is the official list of properties located in Claremont and designated by the city council pursuant to this new chapter that we're creating. The next is a certificate of appropriateness, which is a permit granted by the city staff or the Architectural and Preservation Commission, stating that an application to alter cultural resources in accordance with the city's preservation and design requirements, as well as the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. We will be talking a lot about those Secretary of Interior standards. It's the go-to for all historic preservation efforts in the state of California as well as national. And it might be worth noting historic integrity. This is the authenticity of a property's historic identity, evidenced by the survival of physical characteristics that existed during the property's period of significance. just a few more terms here. Next is preservation. That's the process of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of the cultural resource. And then rehabilitation, which is making a compatible use of a resource through repair, alterations, and additions while preserving those portions or features that convey its cultural values as defined in the Secretary of Interior standards. A good example of that might be the house. So that was a large warehouse that was used for sorting. It's been recently rehabilitated to create the retail uses that you see there now. And then restoration. So this is accurately depicting the form, features, and character of a property as it appeared at a particular time by means of removal of features from other periods in its history and reconstruction of missing features from the restoration period. I also want to touch because there's always been this unless it is somehow exceptionally important. With that, more recent in California, the California Environmental Quality Act, case law and practice has focused on properties that are approaching 50 years rather than waiting to 50 years. Just as an abundance of caution, we were finding that we were losing some pretty significant resources in year 49. Generally, cities are beginning to use 45 years as a guide for when to start considering historic importance as being sort of more prevalent in California recently. So staff is recommending that we use that 45 years as a threshold, just to be very cautious and make sure that we don't allow resources to be demolished that are on track to become cultural resources. So here's just some benefits of being designated as a historic resource in Claremont. First of all, and probably most significantly, is through the Mills Act. If you owners apply for and agree through a contract to make certain sorts of improvements to the home that are in keeping with the Secretary of Interior standards, that a significant reduction in property taxes is available. Second is there's the ability to use the state historic building code, which can allow more permissive standards in lots of situations where you just can't meet current code, and it would be quite onerous to do so. If you have a historic building, you may be able to utilize the provisions of that code in order to not have to make those extensive code improvements. Next is design assistance from Claremont Heritage. They offer their services and spend a lot of time working with buyers, potential buyers, or just long-term owners of properties that are historic and want to try to help maintain the character and historic integrity of those homes. Overall, I think especially in Claremont, the idea of listing properties as historic increases property values community-wide. We have a couple of realtors in the room tonight that I'm sure can vouch for that. I see their ads. They highlight the historic nature of properties. Just more generally, though, historic communities that do a good job of retaining their historic character are able to increase their property value citywide, not just for those individual properties. So just briefly, I want to summarize a few reasons that staff's recommending approval of this ordinance, and here's a few reasons of why. First of all, it's the culmination of decades of work to celebrate and protect our community's unique heritage and character. It's really in Claremont's DNA. It's a big part of this community. Second, I want to note that it's clarifying and codifying existing practices. And I think that helps staff, but I would also say that it's going to help developers and property owners to know what the rules are right up front, what that process will be. It takes out some of the lack of clarity that can exist today. The ordinance is supported by our ad hoc committee and Claremont Heritage. This is a little more esoteric, but I do want to note that there are a number of changes in state law, and they're moving to replace discretion-based codes with objective design standards. So I will say that the city, Claremont staff has relied heavily on discretion for its design review procedures in the past. This ordinance would help clarify decisions regarding cultural resources and makes them more objective. So I think you all have, most of the people that are involved in this meeting understand that Claremont's done a pretty good job despite having no ordinance. We're currently, we have an A+ rating with the local Los Angeles preservation organization as being one of the better communities in LA County in terms of preservation. But we've relied very heavily on these sort of objective subjective judgment, and now we're looking to try to increase objective standards. So I will note that passing the ordinance also is to implement that ordinance. Just to note a few, these are recommendations from the ad hoc committee. The first was that we become a certified local government through the state Office of Historic Preservations. Once we do that, we're able to apply for and receive grants, and we hope that some grant money will help us to do the implementation for this ordinance. The next is to approve a set of design guidelines for protecting the character of the city's neighborhoods, and also a set of design guidelines for protecting the architectural character of existing non-historic structures. That includes the various types of architecture that are prevalent in the city. So one of the we've talked about this. The ad hoc committee's created a draft. This would be laying out what it is that makes a building designed in a craftsman style. So you talk about the eaves and the wood, and then when we talk about the Spanish style architecture that we have in town, laying out specific details about what character defining features that type of architecture has. So we would create a set of design guidelines for each of those most prevalent styles. Ranch house is another one, mid-century modern as well. And next would be to create a database identifying character defining features of the city's various neighborhoods. So the big point of discussion here is, does a neighborhood have driveways or sidewalks? There are neighborhoods in Claremont that have very few driveways. They usually have alley access, and that's a big part of what the character is there. Most of our historic neighborhoods, you don't see a garage. The garages were set behind the house, so that would be something that we might find being called for in several of our neighborhoods in town. And then finally, creating some guidelines for historic preservation. So what we'd be doing here is taking the 1,300 pages or so of the Secretary of Interior standards and trying to boil that down to the most important stuff that would apply here in Claremont. So we'll try to attack all of this work once the ordinance is approved, and we'll just over time try to address all these needs. Just to let you know, this is the sort of early steps in the process. The next is just what it would take to get final adoption of the ordinance. Tomorrow night, the Planning Commission is going to do an advisory review of the ordinance and make a recommendation to the City Council. So I'll be doing a similar presentation tomorrow night. Before that, the Planning Commission, and I would invite anybody who's really interested and wants to show support for the ordinance to show up at that meeting. Next is March 26th. That would be the City Council's first reading of the ordinance. Ordinances take 2 public hearings by the city council in order to approve them. That first meeting would be the large public hearing where everybody is invited to come and express any positive comments, concerns that they have about the ordinance. Second reading would then be held on April 9th by the city council, and then there's a 30-day delay before the ordinance goes into effect. That effective date would be May 9th if we follow this schedule. So with that, I will go ahead and close my presentation and take any questions that we have from the audience.
Has anyone been watching the chat?
Watching with that.
The chat, C-H-A-T.
Sure. Okay, so I do have one from Bob Hale. It's inasmuch as there are many older residential properties, are they considered? I do want to say that there are something like 1,100 properties already listed in Claremont on the current register. Those properties were added at a time when the historic preservation criteria for nominating properties were pretty new and in their infancy. They've gotten a little more specific over time. The ones that we have in our current procedures at the city are pretty broad. And so there may be a time when some of those 1,100 properties are taken off, but there's a whole new tranche or several tranches of new properties that need to be added. Our last significant addition to the register was, it was in the early 90s is what I want to say, but most of them were added in the 80s. And maybe as early as 1978. So we've got a backlog of properties that weren't eligible then that are now eligible and much celebrated. The mid-century moderns are a good example. So I don't know whether that answered the question, but I hope that did.
I live in the Piedmont Mesa area, and many homes here were built in the 1950s, making them approximately 70 years old. And there are some unique architectural features in many of the homes, including some of which have alley access to the garage on the back sides of the property. And my own home was actually built in 1955 for Tate Cadillac Pontiac. So there are quite a number of older homes here. And this being a relatively newer area of Claremont as far as annexation is maybe not being scrutinized in the manner that it perhaps should be.
It certainly should be and will be. I will tell you that the draft, some of the work that the ad hoc committee did was to identify every neighborhood and create a framework for assessing those neighborhoods for unique character defining features. That particular neighborhood has, I think more than anything else, the lack of sidewalks is a big part of the character of the neighborhood and prevalence of that mid-century modern. And there's a lot of custom mid-century moderns that I think are noteworthy up there, and many of them have been well preserved. So I do see that neighborhood as something that you would focus mostly on some very general neighborhood character defining features, and then there would be a mix of these sort of ranch and mid-century homes, as well as there are some older homes up there, especially along the edge of the mesa that could be included from the earlier stages of Claremont, the agricultural stage.
Thank you.
I've got one question in the audience here.
Hi, Chris. Wondering if you know, unless I missed it, how many Mills Act applications is the city able to approve per year? I believe in the past it was 6 per year.
Yes.
And approximately how many have been applying in the last 2 years, and how many, do we know how many total there are in the city at the moment?
So yeah, we capped, I think out of a concern for a big hit to the city's finances, we decided on Mills Act applications to limit them to a total of 6 per year. We probably have around 50 Mills Act, sorry, I don't have an exact number for you. But we don't generally bump up against that 6 per year. So it's been 2 and 3 per year over the last probably 10 years. I think there were a couple of years where we came very close to or hit that limit, but mostly we're coming in a little bit below that.
So that will still remain the 6 per year at this.
Yeah, we're not proposing any changes to the Mills Act at this.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I looked at it over the last 10 years, it's been 12 approved.
Oh, great, thanks. So
Well, my plan.
that would be 1.2 per year over the last 10 years. All right. So there is some capacity there for people that are.
Yes, there's a lot of capacity.
Any other questions?
The chat.
Oh,
I've
okay.
got my hand up, Chris. Hey, it's Drew Reedy. Thank you for the presentation. Can you hear me okay? Sounds like it. I jumped in about 10 minutes late, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but I'm wondering if you can speak to the Heritage Tree Program that's a part of this revision, and also, you know, if you could just speak generally to how maybe the city is thinking about trees on private property, especially as we densify, and especially in relationship to historic homes. A lot of these historic homes in the city have large shade trees, and currently there's no real mechanism in the city to protect those trees. I think there's all of 6 trees listed in the Heritage Tree Program, and none have been listed for over a decade, last I checked. So yeah, could you share some thoughts there? You know, a lot of cities have private property tree ordinances where trees that are removed, old big trees, have to be mitigated for. I know, you know, that's going to be a long road for us here in Claremont, but Pasadena does it, City of LA does it. There's a lot of hesitation to do it here for some reason, but if you could speak to how this helps us as far as the Heritage Tree Ordinance goes, that'd be great. And if I missed it and it would be redundant, I can take the question offline.
No, you didn't miss it. Thanks for bringing it up. And I actually have a slide I just brought up that we can talk through on. I want to start by saying a listing is usually based on a survey that's completed. There's a standard state survey form for historic resources. And so again, we have something on the order of 1,100 properties that are listed. Of those, you know, you may find that 750 or 800 of them actually have that form. Not all of them do. The form quite often refers to landscaping. So if there's a particularly impressive tree, it's usually listed in that form. So while it's not a tree ordinance that I think maybe Drew would like to see, it is something that we take heed of. And we see it as a character beat. And when someone's coming in and proposing to buy a listed home or other property, we're going to look at that landscape as well and try to make sure that as any sort of addition or changes occur, that we're trying to retain that original character. So if there's large oak trees, I think we had some cypress and sort of twisted trunk cypress trees at Mills Act properties that we actually included a requirement to retain. We did the same with some large oaks on another Mills Act property. And we do it on, like I said, on a regular basis. When someone comes in and wants to do an addition to a listed property, and there's some impressive tree there or a tree that was mentioned in the survey, we do what we can to try to design the any changes to the property around so that we can retain those trees. I'll just point out very quickly, there's a section that has criteria for local listing of heritage trees. I'll just run through quickly. These are the 3 criteria that are required for a tree to be designated as a heritage tree or a heritage tree grove. We did make a note here because we don't want to get caught up in trying to preserve trees that are unsafe, that you need to meet these criteria, but they shall also not be designated to have a high risk failure by an arborist certified by the International Society of Arborists. So we didn't want to get caught up in forcing someone to keep a tree and then find that a couple of years later the tree is fails and injures, damages property or other things. So I'll say that the first criteria is that the city has a tree committee. That tree committee is this subcommittee of the Community and Human Services Commission. So any tree that's recommended for designation by the Community and Human Services Commission could become a heritage tree. Similarly, any tree that has historical significance and has been recommended for designation as a cultural resource by the Architectural and Preservation Commission can become a heritage tree or grove, heritage grove. And then finally, I think generally speaking, if we just have a really fine example of a particular species that's located in a prominent location and contributes to the character of Claremont or the city's extraordinary tree canopy, that we want to leave that open as well, if that's something that could be listed as a heritage tree. So that was our approach at this point for trying to address heritage trees. I don't think it's going to address everything that Mr. Reedy would like to see done, which is more of just general tree preservation ordinance, which would be aimed at preserving private and public trees throughout the city.
So, Chris, I had a question on the draft ordinance.
Yes.
So there was the 4.2.4 heritage trees and groves section of the draft ordinance. Is that still in there? Where it talks about that the tree is visible from publicly accessible locations and it meets one or more of the following criteria, which is.
Does it have the DBH, the diameter of the trunk?
It has, well, it says specific trees by virtue of their species, size, age, appearance, or historical significance are determined to be outstanding, shall be protected by declaration of heritage tree status, and shall be protected by the Claremont Municipal Code and Tree Policies and Guidelines Manual.
Yeah, that was a previous iteration.
Okay.
And we ended up going with this language. That one got into species and diameter of trees and heights of trees, and all of that was going to be labor intensive for staff, but more importantly, the architect on our, the landscape architect on our architectural commission, Bob Perry, who is very well respected in the landscape architecture community, pointed out that those are really not good measures. Age and diameter of a tree isn't a particularly good way to decide whether to list something or not. So that's how we ended up with this language.
Yeah, well, I mean, it actually, the criteria that's listed here doesn't mention diameter or anything like that.
Yeah, sorry, there's been several iterations, at least 3. So
is it possible, because this was specifically referred to trees on private property that are visible from a publicly accessible location. Is that still
yeah, it's boiled down to point 3 here. Yeah, we tried to make it a little
less intrusive?
But yeah, a little less wordy and trying to be on the positive side. We're not looking to go out and have an excuse to try to save every tree. This is the case where there is a particularly fine example that is in a prominent location. We wanted to keep it general and positive as opposed to trying to create specific hooks to try to retain particular trees.
Okay.
This is not meant to go out and save every tree. These are the truly landmark type trees in town. And I will tell you, the best ordinance I saw was in the city of Monterey. And they had something like 15 trees on it. So this is not meant to retain the entirety of the city of Claremont's community. That needs to be addressed in other ways.
But Chris, on item number 2, we give the APC now the ability to designate a tree on private property as a cultural resource. So therefore, when we go out to do the forms for the local register, that tree would be noted on there, and therefore it would be included as a cultural resource source of that property.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that would get approved at the commission level. And designations in the end are approved at the city council level. So anything, if you're watching and maybe are worried about a tree on your property, you could come and make your case, and you could have it looked at by an arborist. And again, if there's some concern about the safety of the tree, by a certified arborist, that is, we're not looking to try to force dollars to keep the eucalyptus trees that have a history of once they're dangerous, sort of falling over and injuring or killing people. So with that said, I do have one other question here in the
Hey,
chat.
Chris, can I just follow up real quick? You know, it might be good to include language there about not just having a certified arborist, but a certified arborist who's also tree risk assessment qualified. So I'm a certified arborist and have been through the tree risk assessment qualification class, and you really need to have that qualification to make those determinations. There's lots of arborists without that certification that shouldn't be making those calls. So just a suggestion there. If there's an opportunity to get that language into the ordinance, that'd be great to see. Thanks.
I would love it if you could send that. Bob, Mary, and myself, as well as our arborist staff here at the city, debated that a little. So we went with the most basic level of certification, and we're very open to if there's some meaningful add-on to that we would like to add that, but we needed to be sure that it was appropriate. So if you could send over the language so we can take a look at it, I would appreciate it.
Sure, be happy to. Thank you.
Maybe before tomorrow night.
Yeah, I'll shoot you something tonight. No problem.
Great, thank you. Again, just as a reminder, I'm going to the planning commission tomorrow night. Richard Haskell, I'm curious about the topic of windows. I'm keenly aware of how difficult it is to find replacement windows that are appropriate in appearance and yet include modern specs on transmission, reflection of light and heat. Recommendation for retaining 50-year windows caught my attention. I'm not sure that that's in the ordinance anywhere, but that is what we spend a lot of time talking about at Architectural Commission. Just when you start talking about historic properties, the windows are exceedingly important. And it's something about on certain types of homes, the depth, on other types of homes, colonial, for example, having true divided lights are very important. There's some debate about the materials as well. I think one way to answer your question would be for me to check with our building official and see, you should still be able to use old windows in an old building, especially if it's subject to the historic building code. So I do want to make that point. I also would say that our general policy at staff level, and I think the Architectural Commission is very much in step with this, is to encourage retention of existing windows and tuning them up, so adding weatherizing, stripping paint, doing repairs, you'll find that you'll end up with, it's a cheaper project, it's much less disruptive to the look of the house and to the people living in the house as well. And you will find that even though window salesmen are really out there pushing windows from an energy saving perspective, that the new windows are really not that effective. There are many far more effective ways for a lot lower cost, improve the insulation values of a home. The easiest is to blow in insulation in the attic. There's also wall insulations, especially on south facing walls. All those things can do more than windows, much cheaper, thousands of dollars cheaper. It's probably on the order of 15 to 20% of what a window change out would be. And you have windows that can last you for many more decades. A wood window, we have wood windows throughout town that are 100 years old. Steel windows similarly, again, they get painted shut. So that's an easy thing, strip the paint, do some weatherization around the edges and tune up the hinges. And you will find that you can get another 100 years out of those windows really easily. Putting vinyl windows in is going to get you, 20 years if you're lucky. And then they start failing, the seals fail, and we just don't know how long that material is going to last, but it won't be as long as these other materials that have existed. I also will put a plug in for there's some newer materials, but fiberglass is one that's been around for a while, and we know that fiberglass will be with us for a very long time as well.
So Chris, let me just tell you why I inserted that question into the chat box. I'm familiar with everything you've just said, and I was really surprised when we, because we're trying to maximize the light that we wanted to put into our 1929 building on Baughman Avenue, and of course. In 1987, I think it was, this house that I'm living in was the first Hartman Baldwin major renovation. so they added a second floor to that, and I'm wondering whether that would have happened had there been, a really an ordinance in place. But quite apart from that, I have been surprised, really genuinely surprised by how effective the new windows, and now there's a lot of area involved, but the new windows have really made a huge difference, much more so than the replacement of our lath and plaster, walls with, insulation. I think that's not as effective as I thought it might be, but noticeably. But the windows really blew me away, and now there are some big windows on the house, so that it's it's not the old small ones. Anyway, on the first floor, I should add, we kept all the first floor windows, because they could really be repaired and weatherproofed, and so and they don't experience as much light as the kitchen windows, which we did replace. So just a thought. I'm sure that this is going to be a contentious issue, but I understand the motivation for it, and I in a sense I support it. But I'll tell you, I was really surprised by what the glass can do for you.
Yeah, understood. It is a fairly unique situation. You've got all that window space on the south facing elevation. It's a modern structure, meaning the upstairs was built after energy codes were adopted. So I was referring to an old house with old windows, and assuming that they had Again, if you're talking about a wall of windows on the south elevation, you gotta do something about the windows, I understand. And we can talk to you about other ways with laminated glass, films and other things that can help you retain your old windows and still get some relief from the solar heat gain. So thanks, I appreciate your comment and the chance to us to really look at windows. Our point is we came to a compromise on your house. My recollection is that we were able to get true dividing light, maybe even wood windows. And that's again, it's an addition on a house. It's a modern structure, but we were trying to make sure that you kept the character of the first story portion of the house. And the windows that you put in, I believe, did that pretty well. So even though they're new windows, I'm glad that they sound like they're working well for you.
Great. You're right, by the way, the windows that I'm referring to are both south and west facing. So, it's a big issue.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, so I've got another question here. We need to understand the impact of changes and requirements by insurance companies that impact large trees. Understood. That's a good point, and that's why you saw the language that I had in the tree criteria talking about first and foremost. We're not looking to list trees that have been designated as having a high risk of failure by any arborist. So I think we're very open to that and understand that when insurance companies are indicating that they want to drop you as a policyholder because of the tree, that the city's going to take that seriously.
Can I clarify that?
Okay.
Often the issue doesn't have to do with the safety of the tree, but the question of promotion of fire. And a number of people, including a close friend, had her policy rescinded, or it wasn't renewed because she has tree, what would clearly be called a heritage tree by its size and age, overhanging her roof. She was fortunate and able to find, after a detailed search, to find a company that would insure her, but no guarantees that that won't change. So just a comment that anytime that you require the maintenance of a very large tree on a property, the insurance companies are increasingly sensitive to risk, a number of different kinds of risk.
Thank you. The one other question I have is someone asking, how do we designate a tree on the neighbor's property? And that's interesting. I don't know that I have a good answer for that, but there is currently, to get a resource listed, there's no requirement that a neighbor provide permission, but there is a requirement that they be noticed. So anybody can bring forward a recommendation about a specific resource. In this case, we're talking about a tree, but it could be any resource. And then we, city staff would look at that and see if there was merit to it. And at some point, we would take it forward to the Architectural and Preservation Commission, and they would be the body that would approve that. So the idea would be there would be this independent staff analysis taken to the commission would listen to the public as they review it and make a decision accordingly based on all that information. So that's the process.
Another question comes to mind. Would the cultural preservation ordinance cover city-owned trees?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
One more question in the audience here.
Sure. This ordinance would also cover any parks in Claremont. Like, for example, right now there's a lot of chatter about Lakota Park up in North Claremont?
Well, I mean, we're in a historic building in a park that is certainly considered a resource, right? La Puerta Park is a fairly recently developed sports park that, I mean, theoretically could be listed as a resource if it's more than 50 years old. There might be some trees there that people are interested in trying to preserve. It doesn't like jump out to me as a candidate as something that would be a good resource.
And the park itself would be considered any kind of resource for the community.
Well, no, it wouldn't really meet the criteria. I mean, we can go through the details of the criteria, but I mean, we'd have to identify a historic figure or some kind of important method of construction or something that's important to the city's history. So you could make a case for it. You'd have to persuade the community, including the Architectural and Preservation Commission and then the city council. So.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about city arborists. It's my observation that in the last 10 years, there's been quite a turnover, and maybe we don't even have a city arborist at this time. Can you comment about that?
I don't know that, I mean, we had a very high profile and popular arborist that retired, but we've had the same arborist. There's 2 current certified arborists on staff, and one of them has been on staff for probably 5 years, the other maybe 2. So I wouldn't say it's particularly high turnover rate at that position.
Are either of those also qualified tree risk assessors?
I am not aware, sorry, I don't know enough about that.
I see Drew shaking his head.
Was it that obvious? No, I don't believe either of them are, and they're recently certified, where we had, an urban forester and Dave Roger, with decades of experience. I know that's nothing we're going to solve tonight, but I'll get my jabs in.
Wait, is this is Fred Rock speaking as well? I'm not sure, but.
Sorry, Dave. Oh, Fred, did Fred ask the question? No, that was me, Drew. Sorry, Chris, you might not be able to see me.
No, at any rate, yes, again, I think Bob Perry and myself, as well as our staff here, we're very open to adding some modifying language as to what type of arborist can determine whether a potential resource tree, right? Meaning it's being nominated for landmark status, right? That one of our conditions is that it not be, we don't want to grant a landmark status to a tree that is in danger of failing, right? So if we need to qualify what kind of arborist gets to make that designation, then I'm very open to seeing what kind of credentials you guys come up with so that we can vet them and try to get it into the ordinance, hopefully before we go to the planning commission tomorrow night for their recommendation to council. So I don't see any other chat questions. Oh, no, I actually, there's another one. So it says, how about landscape and water use, native plants required, or just water wise plants, many historic homes, including lawns, etc. So that's a good question, and I'm not surprised it came up during our sustainability dialogue about preservation. There are lots of landscapes that that people find to be character defining features that include very high water demand plant. So camellias and turf, right? And some maybe allays of trees on the college campuses that are very water demanding. I think you'll find that most of those landscapes aren't going to be applying back to a 1900 through 1920 type of building. So those are not going to be something that when you go back in time and look, that's a landscape that needs to be sort of imposed on a current owner of that historic property. You know, when we get to the mall in the middle of Harvey Mudd, that might be a different thing. It's a 50s building, and by then we had good irrigation procedures, and lawn was something that was recommended by a very famous Southern California landscape architect, right? So there may be an occasional landscape where that's required, but I think you'll find that lawn substitutes, shrub substitutes for drought, I guess I'll say water-wise and native plants could be implemented on almost, you know, I'll say 90% and above of our resource properties without impacting the character defining features. But you need to be smart about the plants that you put in and the way that they're maintained. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Are there any other questions in the audience? All right, with that, let's see how we're doing on time. So there is some time remaining. I don't know when you normally want to end. I'm happy to talk about any of the subjects. I'll hang out here in the Garner House for people in the audience here. With that, I guess I'll go ahead and close.
I do have a concern. When you start talking about lawn substitutes, very often people forget that there are trees that need irrigation in that lawn, you know, what was the lawn area. And if we intend to preserve the trees, we should mandate that there be an irrigation system dedicated to the trees that are going to be preserved.
Yeah, the city staff's well aware of that. So in the planning department, we look at certain qualifying landscapes, and there are some sort of re-landscape jobs that get done that aren't subject to they don't qualify under the state water efficient landscape ordinance, but most of the big redos require it. We're doing enforcement right now on someone who just tore out their whole front and street side yard, and it's over the limit, and they need to bring in WELO, water efficient landscape ordinance calcs, so that we can make sure that we approve that planting plan. And that is one of the things we look at, that we make sure that there's the right kind of irrigation to so to keep the plants, the street trees in particular, but even private trees healthy. So when you take lawn out and you've been able to have an oak tree there with lawn, in that case, we're going to be asking you to spiral around drip irrigation and make sure that part of the requirement is that you show us what your setting is, the water settings, and we'll want to see that we're getting, you know, at least we want to see it soak in 14 to 18 inches once a month, at least on an oak, and try to get deep watering, with the understanding that you probably need to water it weekly for the first couple of years to try to keep that tree alive. Similar for sycamores and other trees that we know can get shocked by losing the lawn water that they've been getting from the years.
You may need a consultant on that. 14 to 18 inches might be not quite adequate, but
Okay.
okay.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. Is Stewart on? Are you gonna close this out or David? Okay.
Yeah, Chris, I could go ahead and close it out. Thanks again so much for presenting to us tonight. It's super informative and helpful.
Thanks, everyone. If you're really interested in trying to see this get moved along, or if you have concerns, I would welcome this conversation. Tomorrow night, we're having our meeting, 7 o'clock, City Hall, Council Chambers. It's the Planning Commission. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you,
Thank
Chris.
you, thank you, especially Drew and Fred.
No, the group. Thank you, guys.
Stop share.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm not sure it's even. Seems like-
Hey, come on.
Mhm.